when a desperate single mother inherited a decaying hillside mansion from a forgotten aunt. She thought her financial nightmares were over. She couldn't have been more wrong. Hidden behind the peeling wallpaper and rotting floorboards was a secret so valuable and so dangerous it would put a target on her back. The eviction notice taped to the apartment door was the final blow. Harper Sullivan stood in the dimly lit hallway of her Seattle complex, the cheap pink paper crinkling in her trembling hands. She had 30 days to vacate. For a 28-year-old single mother working double shifts at a downtown diner, 30 days might as well have been 30 seconds. Inside the cramped apartment, her 7-year-old son, Leo, was coloring on the living room floor, his breathing slightly labored from the asthma that drained half of Harper's monthly income. She leaned her forehead against the cold doorframe, closing her eyes and silently praying for a miracle. She had no family left to call, no safety net to catch her. Her parents had passed away years ago, and Leo's father had vanished before the boy was even born. They were entirely alone. The next morning, the miracle arrived, though it came disguised as a stiff, formal letter from a law firm she had never heard of. Gable and Associates. The letter requested her immediate presence regarding the estate of Evelyn Carmichael. Harper stared at the name. Evelyn was her grandmother's sister, an eccentric woman who had become estranged from the family decades ago. Harper had only vague childhood memories of the woman, a tall, imposing figure who smelled of lavender and old paper. Desperation drove Harper to the polished mahogany office of Richard Gable 2 days later. Gable was a meticulous man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses who looked at Harper over the top of a thick manila folder. He informed her that Evelyn had passed away at the age of 91. To Harper's absolute shock, she was the sole beneficiary of the estate. The inheritance consisted of a single property, a sprawling Victorian hillside home in the remote, forested town of Oak Ridge, Oregon. But there was a bizarre stipulation attached to the will. To legally claim the deed and the modest trust fund meant for property taxes, Harper had to reside in the house continuously for 30 days. If she left the property for more than 24 hours before the month was up, the entire estate would be liquidated and donated to a historical society. Harper didn't hesitate. With eviction looming, a free house, even an isolated, creepy one, was a lifeline she could not afford to refuse. She packed her bruised sedan with their meager belongings, pulled Leo out of his elementary school, and drove south down Interstate 5, leaving the rainy, gray skyline of Seattle behind. The drive to Oak Ridge took 6 hours, the landscape gradually shifting from urban sprawl to towering, misty Douglas firs. When they finally arrived at the address, Harper killed the engine, staring up at her new reality. The house sat atop a steep, overgrown hill, overlooking a deep valley. It was a massive 3-story Victorian structure painted a fading, spectral blue. Intricate gingerbread trim hung loose from the eaves, and a wraparound porch sagged under the weight of decades of neglect. Tall, narrow windows stared down at them like hollow eyes. The property was surrounded by a rusted wrought-iron fence, completely isolated from the main town miles below. It was beautiful in a haunting, Gothic way, but it radiated an undeniable sense of foreboding. Leo clutched his mother's hand as they walked up the cracked concrete steps. The heavy oak front door groaned open, revealing an interior trapped in time. White sheets draped the furniture like ghosts. The air was thick with the scent of dust, damp wood, and a faint trace of lavender. As Harper pulled the sheets away, she revealed ornate velvet sofas, towering oak bookcases, and a massive crystal chandelier caked in grime. There was no internet, and the cell service was practically non-existent. They were entirely cut off from the world. That first night, the house seemed to come alive. As Harper tucked Leo into a heavy four-poster bed in a second-floor room, she heard the distinct, rhythmic creak of floorboards in the hallway. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the nightstand and crept out of the room. The corridor was empty, illuminated only by the pale moonlight filtering through a stained glass window at the end of the hall. The house was settling, she told herself. Just old wood adjusting to the night air. But as she retreated to her own room, she couldn't shake the sensation that they were not alone. The following morning brought their first visitor. A sleek, black luxury SUV crunched up the gravel driveway, looking entirely out of place against the decaying backdrop. A man stepped out, dressed in a sharp, tailored suit that contrasted sharply with the rural setting. He introduced himself as Gregory Hayes, a local real estate developer. He had a tight, artificial smile and eyes that coldly calculated the value of everything they landed on. Gregory did not waste time with pleasantries. He stood on the sagging porch and offered Harper a briefcase containing $50,000 in cash. He claimed he had been trying to buy the property from Evelyn for years to develop a luxury eco-resort on the hillside. He told Harper the house was a toxic money pit, riddled with structural issues and black mold, and that taking the cash and walking away was the smartest thing a struggling single mother could do. The sum was life-changing for someone in Harper's position. It would pay off her debts and secure a decent apartment back in Seattle. But something in Gregory's aggressive demeanor, the way his eyes darted toward the front door as if desperate to see inside, triggered Harper's defensive instincts. The money was a lot, but for a property this size, it was an insulting lowball offer. Furthermore, Richard Gable had warned her about predatory developers. She politely but firmly declined the offer, stating she intended to honor her great-aunt's wishes and stay for the month. Gregory's smile instantly vanished. The charming facade dropped, replaced by a scowl of genuine anger. As he turned to leave, he looked over his shoulder, his voice dropping to a low, menacing register. He told her she was making a grave mistake, and that some houses were better left abandoned. Harper watched his SUV speed away, a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. The inheritance wasn't just a house. It was the center of a dangerous secret. The encounter with Gregory Hayes cast a long, dark shadow over the ensuing days. Harper threw herself into cleaning, hoping the physical labor would distract her from the persistent anxiety gnawing at her mind. She and Leo spent hours dusting, sweeping, and throwing open the heavy windows to let the crisp mountain air flush out the suffocating staleness. But no matter how much sunlight poured into the rooms, the house retained a chilling atmosphere. The temperature would inexplicably drop in certain corners, and Harper often found doors she had firmly shut standing wide open when she returned. On the fourth day, the rain began, a torrential, unrelenting downpour that turned the gravel driveway into a river of mud and trapped them entirely indoors. It was during this storm that the house yielded its first real secret. Harper was in the sprawling ground-floor library trying to organize piles of water-damaged books when Leo came running in, covered in cobwebs. He had been exploring the adjacent parlor. He tugged on Harper's sleeve, excitedly telling her he found a loose puzzle piece in the floor. Curious, Harper followed her son into the parlor. In the corner of the room, hidden beneath a heavy Persian rug that Leo had rolled back, a section of the oak floorboards was noticeably uneven. Harper knelt down, wedging her fingers into the gap. With a harsh screech of old wood, the board popped free. Beneath it was a small, velvet-lined cavity containing a single, leather-bound journal. The leather was cracked and worn, the initials E.C. embossed in faded gold on the cover. It was Evelyn's diary. Harper opened the book with trembling hands. The pages were filled with erratic, frantic handwriting. It wasn't a daily log of a quiet retirement. It was the obsessive documentation of a massive cover-up. Evelyn wrote extensively about the Oak Ridge heist of 1928, an infamous local legend Harper had never heard of. According to the notes, a train carrying unregistered gold bullion and rare bearer bonds had been derailed just miles from the property. The thieves were never caught, and the gold was never recovered. But Evelyn's entries suggested she knew exactly who had orchestrated it. Her own father, Harper's great-grandfather. The deeper Harper read, the more disturbed she became. Evelyn wrote that the fortune had been hidden somewhere on the Hillside property, kept secret for decades to avoid federal prosecution. The later entries, dated just months before Evelyn's death, grew increasingly paranoid. Evelyn wrote about seeing shadows in the woods, hearing footsteps on the porch at night, and noticing that items in the house had been subtly moved. "He knows it is here," the final entry read, the pen pressing so hard into the paper it tore the page. "Gregory comes asking for the land, but it is the legacy he seeks. I have sealed the lower depths. The truth must remain buried, lest it destroy us all." Harper's blood ran cold. Gregory Hayes wasn't just a greedy developer. He was looking for a stolen fortune. And Evelyn's death, which the police had ruled a simple heart failure due to old age, suddenly looked terrifyingly suspicious. Harper grabbed her cell phone, desperate to call Richard Gable or the local police, but the screen displayed no service. The storm had knocked out the fragile signal entirely. They were sitting ducks. That evening, the threats escalated from subtle intimidation to undeniable danger. As Harper cooked a meager dinner of canned soup on a camping stove, the electricity having flickered out hours ago, a loud crash shattered the silence of the house. Harper shoved Leo under the heavy oak dining table, pressing a finger to her lips. She grabbed a heavy iron fire poker from the hearth and crept toward the sound. In the front hallway, the massive stained glass window beside the front door had been smashed. Rain and wind howled through the jagged opening. Lying amid the shattered glass on the hardwood floor was a large, jagged river rock. Wrapped around it was a piece of damp paper. Harper snatched the paper, retreating to the kitchen where the camping stove provided the only light. The message was scrawled in thick black marker. "Leave now, or you won't leave at all." Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but the fierce protective instinct of a mother forced her to stay focused. She could not flee in the storm. The mudslide risks on the access road were too high, and driving blindly into the night with an unknown assailant outside was a death sentence. They had to survive the night inside. She barricaded the front door with a heavy credenza and locked every window on the ground floor. The next morning the storm broke, leaving a heavy fog rolling over the hillside. Harper immediately packed their bags, intending to break the terms of the will and flee. No house was worth their lives. But as she opened the front door, she was greeted by an unexpected sight. An older woman with kind, crinkling eyes and a bright yellow raincoat was standing on the porch, holding a basket of fresh muffins. She introduced herself as Nora Davies, the closest neighbor who lived about a mile down the road. Nora had seen the broken window from her driveway and came to check on them. Desperate for an ally, Harper invited Nora into the kitchen and poured out the entire story. The inheritance, Gregory Hayes, the journal, and the threatening rock. Nora's expression darkened. She revealed that Gregory Hayes was the grandson of the local sheriff who had investigated the 1928 train robbery. Rumor in town was that the sheriff had been on the thieves' payroll. Nora looked Harper dead in the eye and warned her that Gregory's family had been obsessed with the Carmichael property for 3 generations. If Evelyn sealed the lower depths, she hid the gold down there, Nora whispered, glancing around the kitchen as if the walls were listening. This house doesn't just have a basement, Harper. It has a Prohibition-era smuggling tunnel. And if you leave now, Gregory will claim this house, find the gold, and whatever happened to your aunt will be swept under the rug forever. Harper looked at Leo, who was innocently eating a muffin in the corner. She was tired of running. She was tired of being a victim of circumstance. If her great-grandfather had stolen that gold, it was blood money. But it was also the key to securing Leo's future and exposing Gregory Hayes. Harper pulled Evelyn's journal from her pocket, turning to a hand-drawn map tucked into the back cover. The entrance to the tunnels wasn't outside. It was hidden behind the massive brick fireplace in the very center of the house. She wasn't going to run. She was going to find the truth. The heavy storm clouds had fractured, allowing weak shafts of morning sunlight to pierce the gloom of the parlor. But inside Harper Sullivan's mind, a different kind of storm was just beginning to gather. She stood before the massive brick fireplace that dominated the center of the house, clutching Evelyn's leather-bound journal. Nora Davies, the eccentric neighbor who had unexpectedly become her only ally, stood a few feet back, holding tightly to Leo's small hand. The boy was unusually quiet, his wide eyes darting between his mother and the towering chimney. The journal's hand-drawn map was intricate but frantic, indicating a mechanism hidden within the masonry itself. Harper ran her trembling fingers over the cold, soot-stained bricks. According to her great-aunt's notes, the entrance to the smuggling tunnels was designed by a master architect during the height of Prohibition. It was built to fool federal agents, meaning it wouldn't open with a simple push. Harper traced the mortar lines, counting 3 bricks up from the mantel and 4 across to the left, just as the faded ink instructed. She found a brick that felt slightly smoother than the rest. Pressing her palm against it, she pushed with all her might. Nothing happened. Panic briefly flared in her chest. What if the mechanism was rusted shut? What if Gregory Hayes returned before she could find the truth? Try pressing the one adjacent to it at the same time, Nora suggested softly, stepping closer. Old mechanical locks often required dual pressure points to prevent accidental triggers. Harper nodded, placing her left hand on the primary brick and her right hand on a slightly protruding stone just below the mantel. She leaned her entire body weight into the wall. For an agonizing moment, there was only silence. Then a deep, grinding sound echoed from within the chimney, like the groans of a sleeping giant being disturbed. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, and the heavy iron grate of the fireplace shifted forward. The entire back wall of the hearth slowly pivoted on a central steel axis, revealing a pitch-black void that smelled intensely of damp earth, mildew, and ancient timber. A rush of cold air blasted out of the darkness, causing Harper to shiver. She grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight she had found in the kitchen drawers and clicked it on. The beam cut through the absolute blackness, illuminating a narrow, spiraling wooden staircase that descended deep beneath the house. "Nora, I need you to stay up here with Leo," Harper said, her voice shaking but resolute. "Lock the front door again. Do not let anyone in. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, or if Gregory Hayes comes up that driveway, you take my car keys and you drive straight to the state police barracks in the valley. Don't stop for anything." Nora gave a solemn nod, pulling Leo closer to her side. "Be careful, Harper. The people who built these tunnels were ruthless. There's no telling what they left behind to protect their secrets." Harper stepped over the hearth and into the hidden passageway. As she began her descent, the temperature dropped rapidly. The stairs were slick with moisture, and the silence of the underground was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of her boots on the rotting wood. The walls were lined with heavy, reinforced concrete, a stark contrast to the elegant Victorian architecture above. It felt less like a basement and more like a bunker. After descending for what felt like an eternity, the staircase ended abruptly in a long, narrow corridor. The air here was heavy and stagnant. Harper's flashlight beam swept across the tunnel, revealing wooden support beams that looked bowed and fragile under the immense weight of the earth above. She moved cautiously, her senses on high alert. The corridor branched off into several smaller alcoves, remnants of a bygone era. She saw rotting wooden crates stamped with faded Canadian liquor insignias, rusted lanterns, and broken glass bottles, the detritus of the 1920s smuggling trade. But at the very end of the tunnel stood a heavy steel door, resembling the vault of an old bank. It was slightly ajar, the thick metal locking bars retracted. Evelyn had written that she sealed the lower depths, which meant someone else had opened this door recently. Harper's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She pushed the heavy steel door, wincing as the hinges let out a piercing shriek that echoed down the corridor. Inside the vault, the beam of her flashlight caught something that made her breath catch in her throat. Stacked against the far wall were dozens of wooden crates, their lids pried open. Inside, glinting in the harsh artificial light, were row upon row of solid gold bullion, stamped with the federal insignia of the 1928 Reserve. Next to them were waterproof metal lockboxes overflowing with pristine, unregistered bearer bonds. It was a fortune beyond comprehension. Millions of dollars sitting in the dark, forgotten by time. But the awe was instantly shattered by a much darker discovery. Lying on the dirt floor near the crates was a silver-tipped walking cane. Harper recognized it immediately from the old photographs in Richard Gable's office. It belonged to Evelyn, and beside the cane, half buried in the dirt, was a modern, tactical flashlight, the kind carried by security personnel or predatory developers. Before Harper could process the implications, a slow, mocking clap echoed from the darkness of the corridor behind her. "I have to admit, Ms. Sullivan," a smooth, chilling voice called out, "I didn't think you had the nerve to actually come down here." Harper whipped around, blinding the intruder with her flashlight. Standing in the doorway of the vault, leaning casually against the steel frame, was Gregory Hayes. In his right hand, reflecting the beam of light, was a sleek black semi-automatic pistol pointed directly at her chest. The silence in the underground vault was suffocating, broken only by the ragged sound of Harper's own breathing. Gregory Hayes stepped fully into the room, shielding his eyes from her flashlight with his free hand. He looked completely different from the polished businessman who had visited her front porch. His tailored suit was covered in mud and cobwebs, and his tight, artificial smile had been replaced by a mask of cold, predatory determination. "Turn off the flashlight, Harper. It's giving me a headache," Gregory commanded, gesturing with the barrel of the gun. Harper slowly lowered the beam, directing it at the dirt floor between them so she could still see his movements. "How did you get down here?" she demanded, her voice betraying a tremor she fought hard to suppress. "Nora is upstairs. The house is locked." Gregory let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Did you really think the fireplace was the only way in? My grandfather practically lived in these woods. He knew this hillside better than the men who dug these tunnels. There's a drainage grate hidden in the ravine on the south side of the property. It connects directly to the old ventilation shafts. I've been trying to get through the reinforced concrete on this side for months. Your dear old aunt caught me down here a few weeks ago." Harper's grip tightened on the heavy flashlight. "You killed Evelyn." "I didn't have to," Gregory sneered, taking a step closer to the crates of gold. "I just backed her into a corner. The old bat's heart gave out purely from the fright of seeing me down here. It was poetic, really. My grandfather died penniless and disgraced because your great-grandfather double-crossed him and kept all this for himself. The sheriff took the fall, and the Carmichael family lived like royalty on stolen wealth. I'm just here to collect my family's rightful inheritance." "This isn't an inheritance, Gregory. It's evidence of a federal crime," Harper said, backing up slightly toward the rear wall of the vault. Her mind was racing. She was trapped in a dead end, 100 feet underground, with an armed man who had nothing to lose. "Semantics," Gregory dismissed, keeping the gun trained on her as he reached into his jacket and pulled out a heavy canvas duffel bag. "Now here is how this is going to play out. You are going to help me load these bars into this bag. It'll take a few trips, but we have time. Once I have enough to disappear, I'll leave. If you try to run, or if you scream, I will walk upstairs and introduce myself to your son." The threat to Leo ignited a white-hot fury in Harper's chest, overriding her terror. She realized Gregory didn't know about Evelyn's journal. He didn't know that Evelyn had documented every single detail of his grandfather's corruption and his own trespassing. The journal, tucked safely in Harper's jacket pocket, was the only thing that could destroy his family's legacy permanently. But to use it, she had to get out of the tunnel alive. As Gregory tossed the empty duffel bag at her feet, Harper noticed something crucial. The wooden support beams directly above the heavy steel door were splintered and bowing heavily. Evelyn had written that she had sealed the lower depths. She hadn't just closed the vault door. She had rigged the tunnel outside it to collapse if tampered with. The explosive charges were likely long gone, but the structural integrity was non-existent. "Pick up the bag," Gregory barked, his patience thinning. Harper bent down slowly, keeping her eyes locked on the ceiling just behind Gregory. "You know, Evelyn wrote about you in her journal," Harper said softly. "She documented everything. The threats, the break-ins, the fact that your grandfather masterminded the 1928 heist." Gregory froze, his eyes widening. "You're lying. Give me the book." "It's upstairs," Harper lied smoothly, her adrenaline peaking. "With my neighbor. She's on the phone with the state police right now." Rage contorted Gregory's face. He raised the gun, aiming it squarely at her head. "Then you're entirely useless to me." In a split second, Harper didn't reach for the bag. Instead, she hurled the heavy industrial flashlight with all her strength, not at Gregory, but at the decaying wooden support beam directly above the steel door. The heavy metal casing of the flashlight struck the rotting wood with a deafening crack. The reaction was instantaneous. The compromised beam snapped. A terrifying groan echoed through the cavern as tons of earth and stone, held back for nearly a century, suddenly shifted. Gregory spun around, instinctively firing a wild shot into the dark as a cascade of rocks and dirt rained down upon him. The tunnel ceiling just outside the vault began to cave in violently. Harper dove to the ground, covering her head as a massive cloud of dust swallowed the room. She could hear Gregory screaming in panic as he tried to scramble back toward the ventilation shaft, but the debris was falling too fast. The entrance to the vault was rapidly shrinking as the earth gave way. Realizing she had only seconds before she was entombed, Harper scrambled over the gold crates, coughing violently through the thick dust. She threw herself through the narrowing gap in the doorway, just as the main ceiling joist collapsed, sealing the corridor behind her in an avalanche of rock and mud. The impact knocked the wind out of her, leaving her sprawling in the absolute darkness of the tunnel. For a moment, there was only silence. Then she heard the faint, muffled sounds of Gregory coughing and swearing from the other side of the collapse. He was trapped in the ventilation shaft, unable to reach the vault or the exit, guided only by memory and the faint draft of fresh air. Harper crawled her way back to the spiral staircase, her knees scraped and bleeding. When she finally emerged through the fireplace into the parlor, covered in soot and mud, Nora and Leo were surrounded by 3 state troopers. Nora had managed to flag down a passing patrol car during Harper's descent. The aftermath was a media frenzy. Gregory Hayes was excavated and promptly arrested for armed assault and breaking and entering. The discovery of the 1928 heist fortune made national headlines. Because the original owners of the bearer bonds were long dead and the federal gold was considered recovered stolen property, Harper did not get to keep the vault's contents. However, under state law, the monumental recovery netted her a finder's fee from the government, a staggering $2 million. Harper Sullivan didn't sell the house to a developer. She used the money to pay for Leo's medical treatments in full, completely renovating the beautiful Victorian mansion into a sprawling bed and breakfast. The terrifying ghosts of the past were finally laid to rest, traded in for the warmth of a secure future, proving that sometimes the greatest treasures are found only when you find the courage to face the dark. What an absolute roller coaster! Harper risked